Hi everyone, and I'm making this video for week 11 of the course, which is on Indigenous spirituality. And there'll be other videos coming. I want to share a couple of videos that I made in the past. I hope the wind noise isn't too much on this video. Sometimes the wind causes a lot of microphone noise, but so I just want to say a few practical things first. Being that, okay, so there's 2 weeks in the course left, and you have a practice for Indigenous spirituality, which is due the last weekend of the course. So in 2 weeks' time, roughly, your practice report for Indigenous spirituality, which is calling in the 7 directions, and you'll see that described in the notes. Online notes. So that's due then. So you can do the practice this week or the last week every day, or you could do the practice for 2 weeks. And I actually would suggest that. So this practice in some ways will be the most sort of distant from our experience, culturally at least. And I would like to suggest that the Indigenous worldview is one which is, we have inevitably grown up and been conditioned by a Western worldview. Regardless of how we've worked on that and we've got free in our ideas and thoughts, we still cannot see the world like an Indigenous person. So in a way, this practice could be the most distant, although we may feel a sort of deep resonance with the practice, and I'll be interested to see if that happens. But so doing the practice for 2 weeks could actually enable you to get much more into the practice. And my own experience with doing that kind of practice is the more you do it, the more it means. So it's not something that necessarily you connect deeply with at first, but not only that, where you do the practice, doing the practice in that place affects that place. So you start to sacralize, make sacred a place, and you'll find that it changes with time if you do that. And if you would do that over a period of years, you would really create a sacred place, preferably in nature, since this is really a nature-based spirituality. It's inevitably deeply connected to the land. So if it could be out in some form or other of the land, if it was a park or where there's some nature around, at least that would be preferable. So like I said, I've got other videos to send you. Indigenous spirituality is, well, okay, first of all, in some ways rather like the New Age, spirituality, which we'll be covering to some extent in the last week, has traditionally had a sort of a rough treatment from academia. I mean, from the perspective of the Western worldview, then we're talking about something that's we would call primitive. And in fact, Houston Smith's treatment of these traditions is by far the weakest in all of the treatments of religions that he has in his book. So we'll be reading it, but I want you to know that I know that his treatment of primitive religions is very weak. And so we have to fill that out with our own experience and with other readings. So, but in academic circles, the idea of the primitive, the idea basically that the world is animate, and it's called primitive animism, that the world is animated by spirit or spirits. The rocks around me, the trees, they're all animated by spirit. They're all, in a sense, alive and conscious in their own unique ways. Then that is regarded as, by our culture as primitive, basically. And I know many of us have moved on past that view of things, but nevertheless, the word animism is a pejorative term in academia. So, and I actually regard it as a very positive term. The thing is, what to bear in mind is that the world could be animated by spirit, could be full of spirit, full of consciousness. Science doesn't have anything to say about that, actually. And we might say, oh, science says that that's not true. That isn't the case. Science actually can't comment on that particular issue. It can't say whether there's a spirit that animates you and me, or the trees or the rocks. It can't even address that element. It can talk about what the things are made of, describe maybe what the things are made of and some of the processes that go on in a thing, the physical processes, but it can't say anything really more than that. So we're actually free in a lot of ways to see where we come to in our relationship with the world and the natural world. And so this practice will be an opportunity to see where you stand and what kind of relationship with the natural world you have. And I think that's a great opportunity. Is or are the indigenous spiritual traditions, which I'm referring to or looking at under the umbrella of shamanism, are those traditions really the precursor of all religious traditions and spiritual traditions? That suggests that in the writing. I don't know the answer to that. It seems as though that could be a reasonable thing to assume, because archaeological evidence says that these kinds of practices have been around for 40,000 years or perhaps even more. So shamanic practices, that kind of religion, spirituality, is by far the oldest religion that we have any kind of access to at all. And of course it's not a written tradition. So so to what degree is this the historical proto-religion? I don't actually know, but it's interesting to speculate. It's interesting to speculate that religious traditions of all kinds would have grown out of this kind of sensibility, this kind of connection to the land. Or I suppose one could say perhaps this started it, and then something else came in. There was a new sensibility that came into the human race as consciousness evolved, and a new sensibility caused a new kind of religion. So it wasn't. It's not that all religions are based ultimately on an indigenous background. It's that they evolved from it, but with new elements coming in all the time, and that's also very possible. What do you think? It's the version of that. But indigenous spirituality, of course, plays quite a role in the New Age movement, which we get to in the last week. So it's bringing us into that, and many of us have a great sympathy for indigenous spiritual traditions these days. And okay, so why is that? What are we recovering here that we may have lost over time? So these are just some thoughts to go into this week with. Again, you've got the option of doing the practice. I would suggest that doing the practice would greatly enrich your experience of reading on indigenous spiritual tradition. And so starting sooner than later would be great. I'll be sending you more videos about this subject. For me, it's a very big subject, and my relationship with the land here is a very important one for me. And oddly enough, at least I think for me, it connects me with religion in general. So at least for me, it has worked that way, that my connection with nature is something that awakens a religious sensibility within me, that then enables me to have a certain sympathy for pretty much all of the religious traditions in some way or another. So anyway, we'll see how it is for you. Have a good week, and we're sort of coming in, so you know that at the end of the last week there's a final essay, so just be aware that that's coming up. And hopefully this will be fun for you, and I'll be talking to you soon. Okay, bye.